It was a rainy Thursday afternoon in Washington, D.C. The Capitol hummed with its usual intensity, but tucked away in a quiet corner of Georgetown was Café Renaissance, a small, cozy place known for its handcrafted pastries and its complete disregard for political stature. There were no paparazzi outside, no Secret Service lurking at the tables, just soft jazz, the smell of cinnamon, and a few locals tapping away on laptops. And there she was. Tiffany Trump, the youngest daughter of the sitting president of the United States, sat by the window alone. Her long blonde hair, slightly curled at the ends, framed a face far more thoughtful than the tabloids ever captured. She wore a beige trench coat over a navy turtleneck, a pair of dark jeans, and sunglasses despite the cloudy weather, more for armor than anonymity. 2 hours. She'd been there for 2 whole hours, nursing a single cup of lavender tea and staring out at the sidewalk puddles. Her phone buzzed every few minutes. Texts from her security detail, missed calls from her assistant, a notification from her father's PR team requesting a meeting. She ignored them all. It had been a tough week. Her father, President Donald J. Trump, had just delivered a fiery address at the United Nations. Her older siblings, Don Jr., Ivanka, and Eric, were busy rallying support for the administration's latest economic proposal. Tiffany? She wasn't mentioned in any press release. She wasn't invited to the Oval. She hadn't even gotten a return text from her dad in 4 days. The truth was, she didn't feel like she belonged anymore. Not in the White House. Not in the Trump organization. And sometimes not even in her own skin. She was used to being the quiet one, the daughter from Trump's second marriage to Marla Maples, the one who stayed out of the political arena, who pursued law, who showed up at events only when asked. But lately, even that modest space seemed to be shrinking. She'd been ridiculed by some in the media, dismissed by political operatives as irrelevant, and lately even forgotten by her own team. She stared at her reflection in the window and whispered to herself, "What am I doing here?" That's when the bell above the cafe door chimed. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a faded military jacket stepped in. He shook the rain off his coat, looked around the cafe, and paused. His eyes, sharp and searching, settled on Tiffany. He didn't look like someone from Washington. No slick suit. No earpiece, just a weather-worn face and a presence that somehow pulled gravity toward him. He hesitated, then slowly walked toward her. "Excuse me," he said in a voice low and calm. "Is the seat taken?" Tiffany looked up, surprised. She blinked. No, I guess not." He sat down, removed his jacket, and smiled. "You don't recognize me, do you?" She tilted her head. "Should I?" He chuckled. "Maybe not. Last time you saw me, you were 10 years old, running around Mar-a-Lago with a milkshake in one hand and your poodle in the other." Tiffany's eyes widened. "Wait, are you?" He extended a rough, calloused hand. "Major Ryan Callahan, U.S. Marine Corps. Retired. I used to work on your father's security detail. I guarded you and your mom for a year after September 11th. You probably don't remember." Tiffany's lips parted. A memory flickered, her mother waving goodbye as she was led into a black SUV, a friendly soldier with bright eyes letting her pet his service dog in the back seat. I think I do remember," she said softly. He nodded. "I was in town for a veterans conference. Thought I'd drop by here. Never thought I'd see you of all people." Tiffany laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days. "This is wild." "I'll say," Ryan replied, ordering a coffee. "You okay? You look like you've been through a storm." She took a breath. "Maybe I have." Tiffany stirred the remaining tea in her cup as Major Ryan Callahan took a sip of his black coffee. For a moment, silence sat between them, not awkward, but thick with a mutual understanding. 2 very different lives somehow orbiting the same complicated universe. "So," Ryan said gently, "what brings the president's daughter to a quiet cafe like this, all by herself? Shouldn't you be at some political event or gala?" Tiffany scoffed, the kind of dry laugh born from months of bottled frustration. "You'd think, right? But I guess I'm not needed at those things anymore." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "You don't strike me as someone who wants to be in the spotlight anyway." "True," she admitted. "I never asked for it. But sometimes when your whole family lives under one giant spotlight, you start to feel invisible if you're not standing in it." She paused and looked down at her lap. "I'm tired of being the other Trump. The one that doesn't quite fit. I went to law school, I worked hard to build a life outside the Trump Tower, but no one seems to care about that. They just want a headline, a scandal, or silence." Ryan leaned forward, folding his hands. "Let me ask you something. If your last name weren't Trump, what would you be doing right now?" Tiffany smiled faintly. "Probably working at a nonprofit. Maybe helping women get access to legal aid. Something that actually matters. He nodded. You ever think about doing that anyway? With or without the name? She looked at him, curious. I don't know. It feels impossible. Like I'd always be followed. Judged. Misunderstood. Ryan leaned back and exhaled. I get that. I've seen how brutal the world can be when it decides who you are before you even speak. In the Corps, I served under 3 presidents. I've seen sons, daughters, spouses of power holders. And let me tell you, none of them had it easy. But the ones who made peace with who they really were. They're the ones still standing today. Tiffany looked out the window again. The rain had slowed, and a soft sun began to break through the clouds. I think that's why I came here, she said slowly. Not just to escape the noise, but to figure out who I am when it's quiet. Ryan smiled. That's the best place to start. He took another sip of coffee, then looked at her seriously. Listen, I'm no therapist, but I've been through enough wars, overseas and inside myself, to recognize when someone's fighting one silently. And from the looks of it, Tiffany, you're fighting one hell of a battle. Tiffany's eyes misted over. No one, not even her close friends, had said something that real to her in a long time. Maybe ever. Thank you, she whispered. You don't owe me that, Ryan replied. But I'll tell you this. If you want out of the noise, I've got a cabin in West Virginia. No phones, no reporters, no headlines. Just trees, trails, and clarity. You're welcome to visit anytime. Tiffany blinked. Are you serious? Dead serious. You could use a few days without cameras. She considered it. The idea sounded crazy, irresponsible even, but also exactly what her soul craved. Then her phone buzzed again. This time, a call from her father's chief of staff. She stared at it and hit decline. I might just take you up on that, Major, she said with a smile. He tipped his coffee toward her. Then it settled. 2 days later, Tiffany Trump stood at the edge of a gravel driveway in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, staring up at a log cabin nestled between tall pines. The air was crisp, scented with pine and wood smoke. For the first time in months, maybe years, she had no makeup on, no schedule to follow, and no one snapping pictures from behind a bush. Ryan stood beside her, wearing flannel and jeans, holding 2 duffel bags. Welcome to the mountains, he said with a smile. Population, peace and quiet. Tiffany laughed and stepped inside. The cabin was small but warm, stone fireplace, aged leather couches, old books lining the shelves, and a yellow lab named Scout wagging his tail and leaning against Tiffany's leg like she'd always belonged there. This place is amazing, she said, running her hand along a rustic wooden beam. Ryan lit a fire. It's my sanctuary. Saved my life, to be honest. After retiring from the military, I had a hard time adjusting to civilian life. PTSD, anger, you name it. I came out here to disconnect and ended up reconnecting with who I really was. Tiffany listened quietly, absorbing his honesty. It was something she rarely encountered in the polished, filtered world she came from. Over the next couple of days, she slipped into a rhythm. Mornings with coffee on the porch. Afternoons hiking through leaf-strewn trails. Evenings filled with grilled meals, vinyl records, and conversations about everything from poetry to politics to pain. Ryan, it turned out, was more philosopher than soldier. He quoted Marcus Aurelius, kept a handwritten journal, and had once spent a year teaching kids in Afghanistan how to read. And Tiffany? She wasn't just the first daughter out here. She was Tiff, a 30-year-old woman rediscovering her voice in the stillness. One evening, after a long walk by the river, Tiffany finally broke the silence that had been sitting on her chest. You know, she said, staring into the fire, I always wanted to be known for something. But not for being my father's daughter. I wanted to be known for what I stood for. Ryan nodded. So what do you stand for? The question hit her like a punch, not because it was harsh, but because no one had ever asked her directly. She looked into the flames. I stand for fairness. For people who don't get hurt. For women fighting uphill battles in law, in politics, in their homes. I went into law not for power or money, but because I believed in justice. Quietly, without cameras. Ryan leaned back. Then you're not lost. You're just unclaimed. You haven't claimed your own path yet. You've been reacting instead of creating. Tiffany breathed in deeply. I want to change that, she said firmly. You can. But you'll have to walk through the fire to get there. It won't be easy, especially with the last name Trump. She chuckled. You think I don't know that? They shared a smile. Later that night, after Ryan had gone to bed, Tiffany stayed up journaling beside the fire. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just writing what was expected of her. She was writing from the soul, page after page, about who she was, who she wanted to become, and how this cabin in the mountains might be the beginning of something bigger. A new story. Her story. And she wasn't afraid anymore. The morning fog still hovered over the treetops as Tiffany poured herself a cup of coffee. Scout wagged his tail and followed her onto the porch, where she sat with her knees pulled to her chest, breathing in the earthy, pine-scented calm. She had been at Ryan's cabin for 4 days, and something inside her had shifted. No, awakened. The ever-present anxiety that clung to her back in DC had lifted. Her skin felt real. Her laughter wasn't measured. And for once, her name felt less like a burden and more like an opportunity. Ryan joined her a few minutes later, handing her a piece of toast with homemade blackberry jam. "You're quieter today," he said. "Thinking." She nodded. "About what comes next?" He sat beside her, folding his arms. "Have anything in mind?" She took a sip of coffee. "A foundation. Not one that just bears my name like some PR tool, but a real one. Legal clinics for women who can't afford representation. Help for domestic abuse victims navigating the system. Maybe some work with female veterans." Ryan looked impressed. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious about anything." Her phone had remained off for days, and it had felt glorious. No social media feeds filled with speculation about her wardrobe. No press releases to approve. No team of handlers telling her which version of herself was appropriate to display. And yet, she knew the real world awaited. The name Trump wasn't going anywhere. Neither were the opinions, criticisms, or assumptions that came with it. "I'll need to step back into that world," she said softly. "But this time on my terms." Ryan gave a slow, thoughtful nod. "Then do it. With clarity. With steel. No apologies." Tiffany looked at him and smiled. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just another guy trying to play hero. But you're different. And you," he said, "are not what the media makes you out to be either. You're not spoiled. You're not entitled. You're searching. And that's rare." They shared a long look. Something unsaid passed between them. Something more personal than politics or therapy or family legacies. Later that evening, as the wind rustled the trees, Tiffany sat alone by the fire with her journal open. She wrote a title across the page. Project Phoenix. Rising from the noise. Beneath it, she sketched out her vision for the foundation, part legal aid, part women's leadership incubator, part storytelling platform. It wouldn't be flashy. It wouldn't be partisan. It would be hers. At that moment, she felt a deep, reassuring certainty settle over her. Ryan came back inside, drying his hands after doing the dishes. "Leaving tomorrow?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Back to the storm." He walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're ready." "No," she said. "I'm becoming ready. And that's more than I could have said a week ago." They stood there, the fire crackling, two very different souls joined by an unlikely collision in a DC cafe. "What if I told you," Tiffany said with a teasing smile, "that I'd be back here in 2 weeks to hike that ridge you keep bragging about?" "I'd say," Ryan grinned, "I'll have the firewood ready." The Washington Monument gleamed under the sharp light of early spring as Tiffany Trump stepped onto the stage at Georgetown Law School. Her hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, her makeup minimal. She wore a simple navy pantsuit, no flashy jewelry, no designer bag. She didn't need armor today. Behind her, a banner stretched across the hall. Launch of Project Phoenix. Justice for every woman. The room was filled with students, professors, legal aid workers, and survivors of domestic abuse who had fought, scraped, and clawed their way through the system with little to no support. Some whispered and pointed, "Is that Tiffany Trump?" But this time, there was no mockery in their tone, only curiosity, and slowly respect. She adjusted the mic. "Most of you know me for my last name," she began, her voice clear but steady. "But that's not why I'm here today. I'm here because I know what it feels like to be underestimated. I know what it's like to walk into a room and have people think they know your story before you say a word." A hush fell over the audience. "I went to law school because I believed the system should protect the powerless. But what I saw was a system that often favored the powerful. Those who could afford the right lawyer, who could navigate the bureaucracy, who didn't get silenced just because they were poor or female. She took a breath. That's why I created Project Phoenix, to help women rise. Not just with charity, but with counsel. With dignity. With power. She scanned the room and saw nods, tears, claps. After the speech, she stepped down and was swarmed by young women asking questions, volunteers signing up, a professor inviting her to guest lecture. But she didn't let it overwhelm her. She had her purpose now. She had reclaimed her name. That evening, she walked out of the building into the pink glow of sunset over the Potomac. Her phone buzzed with hundreds of messages. Articles were already going viral. Tiffany Trump steps into the arena on her own terms. The quiet Trump makes a loud statement for justice. She smiled and muted the notifications. Instead, she opened one message that mattered most. A simple text from Ryan. She stared at the words for a long moment, heart full. This wasn't the ending. This was the beginning. And while the world might still see her as a Trump, from this moment forward, Tiffany knew she was more than that. She was a woman who had sat alone in a cafe for 2 hours, looking for something the world couldn't give her, and who found it in the most unexpected place. Not in a man, not in fame, but in the reflection of a firelit window, in the wilderness of West Virginia, and in the quiet certainty of her own voice finally rising to meet the world.